Good morning. Good morning, Castory Elementary. Good morning, Mrs. Phillips' fourth grade class. So glad you tuned in. I'm Mr. Phillips. Some of you I've met. I'm Mrs. Phillips' husband. And she's downstairs right now on the computer talking to probably a whole bunch of you. And I thought I'd come up here and read a book. And I think I'm going to read The Watsons Go to Birmingham. So if you'd like to listen to me read The Watsons Go to Birmingham, I'd love to have you. And that not only goes for Mrs. Phillips' fourth grade class at Castory, but for anybody else who wants to listen. Medium-sized book, going to take a while to read, so tune in for a couple chapters a day, or maybe one chapter a day, whatever you got time for. And I hope you really enjoy it. I thought I'd start off by telling you a little bit about the guy who wrote the book. His name is Christopher Paul Curtis. I've got a picture of him on my phone. Let's see if I can bring that up. Kind of low tech, but it works. There he is. Christopher, what's his name? Yeah, Christopher Paul Curtis. Handsome man, distinguished touch of gray. Looking good. Anyway, that's Christopher Paul Curtis. And he was born in 1953. And he lived up in Michigan. And the thing you probably need to know about Michigan during that time is they built a lot of cars up in the Detroit area. And it was a big place for a lot of factories and cars. And he worked in those factories for years and years building cars. And then he quit and he did some other jobs and he did some other things. And his wife said to him one day, husband, you've been talking about writing a book for an awful long time. Why don't you go ahead and write that book you've been talking about writing? So he did. And he wrote The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963. And it did really well. It got published, obviously, and it got nominated for the Newbery Award. And the Newbery Award is like the greatest young adult novel of the year. Now, he didn't win that year, but he got nominated. And his very first book to get nominated for the Newbery, that was a huge honor. So, man, what a good idea the wife had. Why don't you quit your job and write that book you've been talking about? So he did really well. And that was in 1995 that he published this book. A couple years later, 1999, he wrote another book called Bud Not Buddy. Maybe you've read it. Oh my gosh, that's a great book. And it not only was nominated for the Newbery, but it won the Newbery. So right off the bat, man, this guy's writing great books and the public loves them and people are giving him awards. And best thing he ever did was, hey, why don't you write that book you've been talking about? What a good wife. I was reading an interview of him, and people often ask authors, what's your favorite book? And he says, authors usually say something like, oh, well, books are like my children. I love them all equally. He said, not me. I love one child more than the other. He's talking about his books. He said, I like The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963. That's my favorite book. Because he says, if it wasn't for that book, I'd still be working in a warehouse, doing hard labor. So he does love this book, and it's a great book. It's just a wonderful, wonderful book. Here's the medal that it won for being a Newbery Honor book. It's about a family, and they live in a town called Flint, Michigan. I thought I'd show you a map. Here's a map. It's kind of low tech, but it works. Here's a map of the United States, and Flint, Michigan is up here. And these guys are going to take a road trip in a car all the way down here to Birmingham, Alabama. So here's the United States, here's us over here in Sacramento. So it's this part of the country. And they're going to drive from Flint, Michigan to Birmingham, Alabama. But the other part of the book, you see the Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963. And it turns out that's kind of an important year. A lot was going on in our country, especially in Birmingham, Alabama in the South in 1963. And you may have heard about it. It's something called the Civil Rights Movement. And some people, especially in the South, said, well, you know what? If you look like this, you need to go to this school, and you need to eat in this restaurant, and you need to drink out of this drinking fountain, and you need to ride in this part of the bus. And if you look like this, something else, well, you need to go to this school, and, you would need to drink in this drink. They wanted everybody separate. And the way they said it was, it's going to be separate but equal. We don't want people that don't look alike mixing together. We want it separate but equal. Well, a lot of people weren't real keen on that idea. They said, no, man, we ought to all be together. We ought to do the whole thing. And this thing may be separate, but it sure isn't equal. You know, why is it that your school looks a lot better than my school? Why is it that your drinking fountain is great and mine's broken? It may be separate, but it sure isn't equal. So for a lot of reasons, they said, this is a terrible idea. And they were fighting against it. And it was called the Civil Rights Movement. Now I'm kind of simplifying it and make it easier. But you know, when you study about it in history, I'm sure you'll learn a lot more about it. And there was a lot of people fighting against this idea of separation. One of them I bet you've heard of, a guy named Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And he was big in that part of the country during those years. And he was fighting back hard, saying, you know what? Everybody ought to be together. Doesn't matter what you look like, what you believe, what you think. We're all in this together, and we should all be together. None of these separations. And this book's kind of about that, because they do go to Birmingham in 1963. But it's also about a family, the Watsons. And they're just a funny family that really loves each other. And they go on this great road trip together. So it's about a couple of things, but mostly it's just fun to read. And I hope you enjoy it. He dedicates the book. Here's the dedication. I'll read it to you. This book is dedicated to my parents, Dr. Herman and Leslie Lewis Curtis, who have given their children both roots and wings and encouraged us to soar, and to my sister, Sydney Eleanor Curtis, who has been unfailingly supportive, kind, and herself. Probably the best thing a person can be is themselves. Now there's another page, and it says, in memory of. And it lists 4 young ladies, really girls. In memory of Addie Mae Collins. In memory of Denise McNair. In memory of Carol Robinson. And in memory of Cynthia Wesley. And they were all born either 1949 or 1951, but they all died on September 15th, 1963. And there you can see their names and what year they were born. And they all died on the same day. The toll for one day in one city. I bet you by the time this book's over, we're going to figure out what that is all about. Why did those girls all die on that same day? So let's learn about some history, and let's read about a really great family, the Watsons. So here's chapter 1. I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 1, and you wonder why we get called the Weird Watsons. It was one of those super duper cold Saturdays. One of those days that when you breathed out, your breath kind of hung frozen in the air like a hunk of smoke. And you could walk along and look exactly like a train blowing out big, fat, white puffs of smoke. It was so cold that if you were stupid enough to go outside, your eyes would automatically blink 1,000 times all by themselves, probably so the juice inside them wouldn't freeze up. It was so cold that if you spit, the slob would be an ice cube before it hit the ground. It was about 1,000,000,000 degrees below zero. Wow, that sounds pretty cold. It was even cold inside our house. We put on sweaters, hats, scarves, and 3 pairs of socks, and still we were cold. The thermostat was turned all the way up, and the furnace was banging, and it sounded like it was about to blow up, but it still felt like Jack Frost had moved in with us. All my family sat real close together on the couch under a blanket. Dad said this would generate a little heat, but he didn't have to tell us this. It seemed like the cold automatically made us want to get together and huddle up. My little sister, Joetta, sat in the middle, and all you could see were her eyes because she had this scarf wrapped around her head. I was next to her, and on the outside was my mother. Mama was the only one who wasn't born in Flint, so the cold was hardest on her. All you could see were her eyes, too, and they were shooting bad looks at Dad. She always blamed him for bringing her all the way from Alabama to Michigan, a state she called a giant icebox. Dad was bundled up on the other side of Joey, trying to look at anything but Mama. Next to Dad, sitting with a little space between us, was my older brother, Byron. Byron had just turned 13, so he was officially a teenage juvenile delinquent, and he didn't think it was cool to touch anybody or let anyone touch him, even if it meant he had to freeze to death. Byron had tucked the blanket between him and Dad down into the cushions of the couch to make sure he couldn't be touched. Dad turned on the TV to try to make us forget how cold we were, but all that did was get him in trouble. There was a special news report on Channel 12 telling about how bad the weather was, and Dad groaned when the guy said, "If you think it's cold now, wait until tonight. The temperature is expected to drop into low record territory, possibly reaching the negative 20s. In fact, we won't be seeing anything above zero for the next 4 or 5 days." He was smiling when he said this, but none of the Watson family thought it was funny. We all looked over at Dad. He just shook his head and pulled the blankets over his eyes. Then the guy on TV said, "Here's a little something we can use to brighten our spirits and give us some hope for the future. The temperature in Atlanta, Georgia is forecast to reach..." Dad coughed real loud and jumped off the couch to turn off the TV. But we all heard the weatherman say, "the mid-70s." The guy might as well have tied Dad to a tree and said, "Ready, aim, fire." "Atlanta," Mama said. "That's 150 miles from home." "Willona," Dad said. "I knew it," Mama said. "I knew I should have never listened to Moses Henderson." "Who?" I asked. Dad said, "Oh, Lord, not that sorry story. You got to let me tell about what happened to him." Mama said, "There's not a whole lot to tell, but just a story about a young girl who made a bad choice. But if you do tell it, make sure you get all the facts right." Well, we all huddled as close as we could because we knew Dad was going to try to make us forget about being cold by cutting up. Cutting up means being funny. Me and Joey started smiling right away, and Byron tried to look cool and bored. "Kids," Dad said, "I almost wasn't your father. You guys came real close to having a clown for a daddy named Hambone Henderson." "Daniel Watson, you stop right there. You're the one who started that Hambone nonsense. Before you started that, everyone called him his Christian name, Moses, and he was a respectable boy, too. He wasn't a clown at all. But the name stuck, didn't it? Hambone Henderson. Me and your granddaddy called him that because the boy had a head shaped like a ham bone, had more knots and bumps on his head than a dinosaur. So as you guys sit here giving me those dirty looks because it's a little chilly outside, ask yourself if you'd rather be a little cool or go through life being known as the Hamboettes." Me and Joey cracked up. Byron kind of chuckled and Mama put her hand over her mouth. She did this whenever she was going to give a smile because she had a great big gap between her front teeth. If Mama thought something was funny, first you'd see her trying to keep her lips together to hide the gap, and then if the smile got too strong, you'd see the gap for a hot second before Mama's hand would come up to cover it, and then she'd crack up too. Laughing only encouraged Dad to cut up more. So when he saw the whole family thinking he was funny, he really started putting on a show. He stood in front of the TV. "Yep, Hambone Henderson proposed to your mother around the same time I did. Fought dirty, too. Told your mama a pack of lies about me. And when she didn't believe them, he told her a pack of lies about Flint." Flint's where they live up in Michigan. Dad started talking Southern style, imitating this Hambone guy. "Willona, I heard tell the weather up that far north in Flint, Michigan. Hard it's colder than an icebox. Seen a movie about it. Think it was made in Flint. Movie called Nanook of the North. Yep, do believe for sure it was made in Flint. Flint, Michigan. Folks, they're living these things called igloos. According to what I seen in this here movie, most folks in Flint is Chinese. Don't believe I seen nan one colored person in the whole dang city. You a Bama gal. Don't you believe you'd be too happy in living in no igloo? Ain't got nothing against them, but don't believe you'd be too happy living amongst a whole slew of Chinese folks. Don't believe you'd like the food. Only thing them Chinese folks in that movie ate was whales and seals. Don't believe you'd like no whale meat. Don't taste a lick like chicken. Don't taste like pork at all." Mama pulled her hand away from her mouth. "Daniel Watson, you are one lying man. Only thing you said that was true was that being in Flint is like living in an igloo. I knew I should have listened to Moses. Maybe these babies might have been born with lumpy heads, but at least they'd have warm lumpy heads. You know, Birmingham is a good place, and I don't mean just the weather either. But the life is slower. The people are friendlier. Oh yeah, Dad interrupted. They're a laugh a minute down there. Let's see, where was that coloreds only bathroom downtown? Daniel, you know what I mean. Well, things aren't perfect, but people are more honest about the way they feel. She took off her mean eyes off Dad and put them on. Byron and folks there know how to respect their parents. Byron rolled his eyes like he didn't care. All he did was tuck a blanket farther into the couch's cushion. Dad didn't like the direction the conversation was going, so he called the landlord for the 100th time. The phone was still busy. That snake in the grass has got his phone off the hook. Well, it's going to be too cold to stay here tonight. Let me call Cindy. She just had that new furnace put in. Maybe we can spend the night there. Aunt Cindy was kind of mean, but her house was always warm, so we kept our fingers crossed that she was home. Everyone, even Byron, cheered when Dad got Aunt Cindy, and she told us to hurry over before we froze to death. Dad went out and tried to get the brown bomber started. That's what we called our car. It was a 1948 Plymouth that was dull brown and real big. Byron said it was turd brown. Uncle Bud gave it to Dad when it was 13 years old, and we had had it for 2 years. Me and Dad took real good care of it, but some of the time it didn't like to start up in the winter. After 5 minutes, Dad came back in huffing and puffing and slapping his arms across his chest. Well, it was touch and go for a while, but the great brown one pulled through again. Everyone cheered, but me and Byron quit cheering and started frowning right away. By the way Dad smiled at us, we knew what was coming next. Dad pulled 2 ice scrapers out of his pocket and said, "Okay, boys, let's get out there and knock those windows out." He doesn't mean knock them out. He means take the scrapers and scrape the ice off, because you can't very well drive down the road with snow and ice all on the windshield. So before you go, you got to scrape it all off, and he's going to make the boys do it. We moaned and groaned and put on some coats and went outside to scrape the car's windows. I could tell by the way he was pouting that Byron was going to try to get out of doing his share of the work. "I'm not going to do your part, Byron. You better do it, and I'm not playing either." "Shut up, punk." I went over to the brown bomber's passenger side and I started hacking away at the slab of ice that was all over the windows. I finished Mama's window and took a break. Scraping ice off of windows when it's that cold can kill you. I didn't hear any sound coming from the other side of the car, so I yelled out, "I'm serious, Byron. I'm not doing that side too. I'm only going to do half of the windshield. I don't care what you do to me." The windshield on the bomber wasn't like the new 1963 cars. It had a big bar running down the middle of it, dividing it in half. "Shut your stupid mouth. I got something more important to do right now." I peeked around the back of the car to see what By was up to. The only thing he'd scraped off was the outside mirror, and he was bending down to look at himself in it. He saw me and said, "You know what, Square?" He calls his brother Square. Square means that you're not cool, you're not hip and cool. "Hey, Square." "You know what, Square? I must be adopted. There just ain't no way 2 folks as ugly as your mom and daddy could have given birth to someone as sharp as me." He was running his hands over his head like he was brushing his hair. I said, "Forget you." And I went back over to the other side of the car to finish the back window. I had half of the ice off when I had to stop again and catch my breath. I heard Byron mumble my name. I said, "You think I'm stupid? It's not going to work this time." He mumbled my name again. It sounded like his mouth was full of something. I knew this was a trick. I knew this was going to be How to Survive a Blizzard Part 2. Now, How to Survive a Blizzard Part 1 had been last night when I was outside playing in the snow and Byron and his buddy Butthead came walking by. Butthead has officially been a juvenile delinquent even longer than Byron. A juvenile delinquent is like a kid who gets into trouble a lot, "Say, kid," Bud said, "you want to learn something that might save your stupid life one day?" I should have known better, but I was bored and I think maybe the cold weather was making my brain slow, so I said, "What's that?" "We're going to teach you how to survive a blizzard." "How?" Byron put his hands in front of his face and said, "This is the most important thing to remember, okay?" "Why?" "Well, first we got to show you what it feels like to be trapped in a blizzard. Are you ready?" He whispered something to Buphead and they both laughed. "Yeah, I'm ready." I should have known that the only reason Buphead and Bi would want to play with me was to do something mean to me. "Okay," Bi said, "now the first thing you got to worry about is high winds." Byron and Buphead each grabbed one of my arms and one of my legs, and they swung me between them, going, "Ooh, blizzard warning, ooh, take cover." Buphead counted to 3, and on the third swing, they let me go in the air. I landed head first in the snow. But that was okay because I had on 3 coats, 2 sweaters, a t-shirt, 3 pair of pants, 4 socks, along with a scarf, a hat, and a hood. These guys couldn't have hurt me if they'd thrown me off the Empire State Building. It's a big building in New York City. After I climbed out of the snowbank, they started laughing, and so did I. "Cool, baby bro," Bi said. "You passed that part of the test with a B+. What do you think, Buphead?" Buphead said, "Yeah, I think I'd give the little punk a A." They whispered some more and they started laughing again. "Okay," Bi said, "now the second thing you got to learn is how to keep your balance in high wind. You got to be good at this so you don't get blown into no polar bear dens." They put me in between them and they started making me spin round and around. Seems like they spun me for about a half an hour. When slobs started flying out of my mouth, they let me stop and I wobbled around for a while before they pushed me back in the same snowbank. When everything stopped going in circles, I got up and we all laughed again. They whispered some more, and then Bi said, "What do you think, Buphead? He kept his balance a good long time. I'm going to give him an A-. I ain't as hard a grader as you. I'm going to give the little punk a double A-." "Okay, Kenny, now the last part of surviving a blizzard. You ready?" "Yep." "You passed the wind test, and you did real good on the balance test, but we got to see if you're ready to graduate. You remember what we told you the most important part about surviving?" "Yep." "Okay, here we go. Buphead, tell him about the final exam." Buphead turned me around to look at him, putting my back to Byron. "Okay, Square," he started. "I want to make sure you're ready for this one. You done so good so far. I want to make sure you don't blow it at graduation time. You think you're ready?" I nodded, getting ready to be thrown in the snowbank real hard this time. I made up my mind I wasn't going to cry, and I made up my mind that no matter how hard they threw me in that snow, I was going to get up laughing. "Okay," Buphead said, "everything's cool. You remember what your brother said about putting your hands up? Like this?" I covered my face with my gloves. "Yeah, that's it." Buphead looked over my shoulder at Byron and then he said, "Ooh, high winds blowing snow. Ooh, look out, blizzard coming. Death around the corner, look out." Byron mumbled my name, and I turned around to see why his voice sounded so funny. As soon as I looked at him, Byron blasted me in the face with a mouthful of snow. Man, it was hard to believe how much stuff Bi could put in his mouth. Him and Buphead just about died laughing as I stood there with snow and spit and ice dripping off my face. Byron caught his breath and said, "Oh man, you flunked. You done so good and then you go flunk the blowing snow section on how to survive a blizzard? You forgot to put up your hands. What you say, Buphead? F?" "Yeah, double F-. It was a good thing my face was numb from the cold already, or I might have froze to death. I was too embarrassed about getting tricked to tell on him, so I went in the house and I watched TV. So, the big brother was kind of mean to him with his friend Buphead. They threw him in the snow 2 times and then spit snow in his face. So as me and Bi scraped off the ice off the brown bomber, I wasn't going to get fooled again. I kept on chopping ice off the back window and ignored Bi's mumbling voice. Next time I took a rest, Byron was still calling my name, but it sounded like he had something in his mouth. He was saying, "Key, hey, hey." When he started banging on the door of the car, I went to take a peek at what was going on. Vi was leaned over the outside mirror, looking at something real close. Big puffs of steam were coming out the side of the mirror. I picked up a big, hard chunk of ice to get ready for Byron's trick. Heavy, hey, go get mama, hey up. I'm not playing, Byron. I'm not that stupid. You better start doing your side of the car or I'll tear you up with this ice ball. He banged his head on the car harder and he started stomping his feet. Oh, Biggie, help me, go get mine. I raised the chunk of ice over my head. I'm not playing. You better get busy or I'm going to tell Dad. I moved closer, and when I got right next to him, I could see boogers running out his nose and tears running down his cheeks. These weren't just tears from cold either. These were big, juicy crybaby tears. I dropped my hunk of ice. Vi, what's wrong? Hey, go get hit. I moved closer. I couldn't believe my eyes. Byron's mouth was frozen on the mirror. He was stuck as a fly on flypaper. I could have done a lot of stuff to him. If it had been me with my lips stuck on something like this, he'd have tortured me for a couple days before he got help. Not me, though. I nearly broke my neck trying to get into the house to rescue Byron. As soon as I ran through the front door, Mom and Dad and Joey all yelled, "Close the door! Mama, quick, it's Vi. He froze up outside." No one seemed too impressed. I screamed, "Really? He's froze to the car. Help, he's crying." That shook them up. You could cut Byron's head off and he probably wouldn't cry. Kenneth Bernard Watson, what on earth are you talking about? Mama, please hurry up. Mama and Dad and Joey threw on some extra coats and followed me to the brown bomber. The fly was still stuck and buzzing. "Oh, Mama, help me. Get me out of here." "Oh, my Lord," Mama screamed. And I thought she was going to do one of those movie-style faints. She even put her head on her forehead and staggered back a little. Joey, of course, started crying right along with Byron. Dad was doing his best not to explode laughing. Big puffs of smoke were coming out his nose and mouth as he tried to squeeze his laughs down. Finally, he put his head on his arms and leaned against the car's hood and howled. "Byron," Mama said, wiping tears off his cheeks with the end of her scarf. "It's okay, sweetheart. How did this happen?" She sounded like she's going to be crying any minute herself. Dad raised his head and said, "Why are you asking how it happened? Can't you tell, Willona? This little knucklehead was kissing his reflection in the mirror and got his lips stuck." Dad took a real deep breath. "Is your tongue stuck too?" "Quit teasing, help." Well, at least the boy hadn't got too passionate with himself. Dad thought that was hilarious and put his head back on his arms. Mama didn't see anything funny. "Daniel Watson, what are we going to do? What do y'all do when this happens up here?" Mama started talking Southern style when she got worried. Instead of saying here, she'd say here. And instead of saying you all, she'd say y'all. Dad stopped laughing long enough to say, "Willona, I have lived in Flint all my life, 35 years, and I swear this is the first time I have seen anyone with their lips frozen to a mirror. Honey, I don't know what to do. Wait till he thaws out?" "Pull him off, Dad," I suggested, and Byron went nuts. He started banging his head on the brown bomber doors and mumbling, "No, Mama, don't let him." Joey blurted out, "This is just like that horrible story Kenny read me about that guy, Nursery, who stared at himself so long he forgot to eat and starved to death. Mommy, please save him." She went over and hugged her arms around Byron's waist. Mama asked Dad, "What about hot water? Couldn't we pour enough hot water on the mirror so it'd warm up and he could get off?" She kept wiping tears off by his cheek and said, "Don't you worry, baby. We're going to get you off this." But her voice was so shaky and southern that I wondered if we'd be driving around in the summer with a skeleton dangling from the outside mirror by its lips. Dad said, "I don't know. Pouring water on him might be the worst thing to do, but it might be our only chance. Why don't you go get some hot tap water and I'll stay to wipe his cheeks." Joey told Vi, "Don't worry, we'll come right back." She stood on her tiptoes and gave Vi a kiss. And then she and Mama ran inside, and Dad cracked up all over again. Well, lover boy, I guess this means no one can call you Hot Lips, can they? Dad was killing himself, or the last of the red hot lovers either, huh? He tugged on Byron's ear a little, pulling his face back. By went nuts again. Don't do that, Mama, can't go get Mama, hurry. I guess that's not going to work, is it? Every time he wiped away the tears and the little mustache of boogers on Byron's lip, Dad couldn't help laughing until a river of tears was coming out of his eyes, too. Dad tried to straighten his face out when Mama and Joey came running back with a steaming glass of hot water, but the tears were still running down his cheeks. Mama tried to pour the water on the mirror, but her hands were shaking so much she was splashing it all over the place. Dad tried too, but he couldn't look at Byron without laughing and shaking. That meant I had to do it. I knew if my lips were frozen on something and everybody was shaking to pour water on them except for Byron, he'd do some real cruel stuff to me. He probably would have accidentally splashed my eyes until they were frozen open, or put water in my ears until I couldn't hear anything, but not me. I gently poured a little stream of water over the mirror. Dad was right. That was the worst thing we could do. The water made a crackling sound and froze as soon as it touched the mirror and By's lips. Maybe By's mouth was frozen, but his hands sure weren't, and he popped me right in the forehead, hard. I hate to say it, but I started crying too. It's no wonder the neighbors call us the weird Watsons behind our back. There we were, all 5 of us standing around a car with the temperature about 1,000,000 degrees below zero, and each and every one of us is crying. Duh, duh, Byron yelled. Daniel Watson, what are we going to do? Mama went nuts. You got to get this boy to the hospital. My baby's going to die. Dad tried to look serious real quick. Willona, how far do you think I get driving down the street with this little clown attached to the mirror? What am I supposed to do? Have him run beside the car all the way down to the emergency room? Mama looked real close at By's mouth, closed her eyes for a second like she was praying, and finally said, Daniel, you get in there and call the hospital and see what they say we should do. Joey and Kenny, you go with your daddy. Dad and Joey went crying into the house, and I stayed by the brown bomber. I figured Mama was clearing everybody out for something. Byron did too, and I looked at Mama in a real nervous way. Mama put her scarf around Byron's face and said, Sweetheart, you know we got to do something. I'm going to try to warm your face up just a little. Now just relax. Okay, Mama. Now you know I love you and I wouldn't do anything to hurt you, right? If Mama was trying to make Byron relax, she wasn't doing a real good job of it. All this talk about love and not getting hurt was making him real nervous. What are you going to do? Huh? Don't hurt me. Get me help. Mama moved the scarf away and put one hand on Byron's chin and the other one on his forehead. No, hit me, hit me. Mama gave Byron's head a good hard snatch. And my eyes automatically shut and my hands automatically flew up to cover my ears and my mouth automatically flew open and screamed out, yow! I didn't see it, but I bet Byron's lips stretched a mile before they finally let go of that mirror. I bet his lips looked like a giant rubber band before they snapped away from that glass. I didn't hear it, but I bet Byron's lips made a sound like a giant piece of paper being ripped in half. That would hurt. When I opened my eyes, Byron was running to the house with his hands over his mouth and Mama following him right behind him. I ran over to the mirror to see how much of Byron's mouth was still stuck there. The dirty dogs let Byron get away with not doing his share of the windows, and I had to do the whole car myself. When we were finally going to Aunt Cindy's house, I decided to pay Byron back for punching me in the forehead and getting out of doing his part of the window scraping. Joey was sitting between us, so I felt kind of safe, and I said to her loud, Joetta, guess what? I'm thinking about writing my own comic book. What about? Well, it's going to be about this real mean criminal who has a terrible accident that turns him into a superhero. Joey knew I was going to tease Byron, so she sat there looking like I should be careful what I said. Finally, I asked her, do you know what I'm going to call this new superhero? What? I'm going to call him the Lipless Wonder. All he does is beat up superheroes smaller than him, and the only thing he's afraid of is a cold mirror. All the weird Watsons except Byron cracked up. Mama's hand even covered her mouth. I was the only one who saw Byron flip me the dirty finger sign and try to whisper without smearing all the Vaseline Mama had put on his lips. You wait, I'm gonna kick your little behind. And then he made his eyes go cross, which was his favorite way of teasing me, but I didn't care. I knew who had won this time. That was the end of chapter 1. Can you imagine it's so cold that you could get stuck to cold, like a cold mirror? What was this kid doing in the mirror? He was kissing himself. He was going in for the big kiss, kissing himself in the mirror. Boy, he must think he's something. And then he gets stuck to the mirror because all his saliva freezes to it. Oh, how embarrassing for that kid. The Weird Watsons. Well, that's the end of chapter 1. I hope you liked it. Come back another time for chapter 2. Adios, my friends.